Hi, everyone, and a warm welcome to another episode of the Talk Room series of podcasts. In this episode, we examine the question of how to be our best selves. And we do that by examining the area of mental health and well-being and how this applies to people's daily lives. For those people who have yet to see any of our previous podcasts, I'd like to introduce my co-presenter, Wendy, who is an accredited CBT psychotherapist and EMDR therapist in private practice and has been involved in the subject of mental health and well-being now for well over 35 years. So, Wendy, an absolute pleasure to be here with you once again.
I like the well over. That's great, Ian. I love that. Okay. And I'd like to introduce you, Ian. You are a senior accredited National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society member and the founder of an amazing service, which is called Hope Therapy Counselling Services. So hello to you and a warm welcome.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you. So today we're talking about something so many people struggle with, the subject of overthinking. That feeling when your mind will not leave something alone. You might be trying to sleep, trying to work, trying to enjoy a cup of tea, and suddenly your mind is off again, replaying, predicting, checking, doubting, and asking, what if? So, Wendy, tell us a little bit more about the problem around overthinking.
Certainly, Ian. Today, we're going to look at what is overthinking, why it happens, the kinds of problems it creates, and then I'm going to give 10 practical ways to handle it using therapy skills from CBT and associated therapies around CBT. The thing about aim isn't simply to empty your mind and never ever worry about anything ever again. We're human. That is unrealistic. Our brain is designed to protect us. The aim is to have a different relationship with your thoughts so that they don't run the whole show. That's the aim.
Absolutely right, Wendy. And with that in mind, let's start with what is overthinking?
Mm-hmm. Good question, Ian. Good question. Good starting question. So overthinking is when the mind gets stuck. It goes over the same thing again and again and again, but without reaching a helpful answer or taking action, which is actually useful. Sometimes it can feel like problem solving, but you're not really solving any problems. It's much more about you just ruminate, you go over, and it turns into a vicious circle. So in a broad term, there are sort of two types of overthinking. The first one is called rumination, and that means going back over the past. So you might replay a conversation from the past again and again, constantly criticizing yourself, thinking about all the negative thoughts that you have, or go over a situation where you think, oh, why did I say that? Or did I get it wrong? What do people think of me? So you're ruminating about the past. The second one is worry. This means that you're thinking a lot about the future. So it's all about future thinking. So example is, what if something goes wrong? It's a what if thought. Or what if I cannot cope? A helpful way to put this is if you go into problem solving, that moves you forward. Overthinking keeps you stuck, and you should be able to tell the difference.
I love that way of putting it. Problem solving moves you forward, overthinking keeps you stuck. And that really sums it up nicely for me. So, so with that in mind, can you just give us some examples of overthinking?
Yeah, certainly, Ian. So obviously, it's a very individual thing. There's sort of genuine kind of examples that people might be able to relate to. And it's quite good to really think, almost when you're listening to this, think it like a tick box exercise. do I do this? And do a little bit of assessment at the same time. So do you, after a meeting at work or even a family meeting or maybe a social meeting, you then go away and then you replay what you said and worry that you sounded silly, stupid, too loud, too cocky, whatever it is that you believe. Okay, you're going over again. Another classic is you send a text to somebody and that person takes longer than usual to reply. So you fill in the gap. You think, what have I done wrong? Why don't they like me anymore? Have I offended it? Was the text wrong? Obviously fallen out with me. I've really offended them. Okay. And you go over and over and over. A simple act that somebody hasn't texted you at a time they would normally do. Another one is you make a small mistake. Stumbling over your words, maybe you trip up, maybe you forget something, and then your mind goes to a real sort of general, critical, put down message. Here I go again. I always messed up. I get it wrong. I'm a failure. I had a woman I was speaking to today who was thinking she was mad all the time. I mean, it's very, very sad. Okay, that always mess things up. Or there you are at nighttime trying to go to sleep, okay? Trying to get, because you've got an important day tomorrow. And what happens? There, your mind is wide awake, thinking about all kinds of things that could go wrong, thinking about what tomorrow brings, worrying about an event next month, really ruminating or worrying about your finances. Maybe there's something in your family you're worried about. Maybe you do a lot of scanning of your body, you've got a bit of health anxiety going on and you're kind of noticing it a lot. Something's happening at work. Again, you're worried about that. So you just go over and over again. And of course, it keeps you awake. And therefore, you don't sleep properly. And therefore, you're more likely to not perform as well or make mistakes the next day. So that's a very common one. Another one people do a lot is they continually ask for reassurance. Okay. So they don't trust themselves that they've got the answer, constantly look for validation from others. Okay. So say they were in a meeting and they go back to the colleague and say, well, how was I? Was I any good? How did I come across? Was I too loud? Or did I use the right words? And, the colleague will probably reassure them and say, yeah, you're fine. You're fine. And you go away. But it's only short-term relief. Actually, you don't really believe them. You believe that the colleague was probably, just placating you perhaps. So it doesn't solve the problem because you're not looking inward, you're looking outward for reassurance. A little bit OCD, you spend a long time researching, checking, because you're very, very worried about making a mistake or the wrong thing. So say you've got a presentation at work or you've got to present something at a meeting, you go over your notes so much, you write down your whole script for your presentation, you go over it again and again and again, every fine detail. But actually, because you over prepare, you're probably tired and confused, so you don't do as well as you would do naturally as well. So a lot of things sort of end in a vicious cycle in a way. They end up as being worse than they would have been before.
And I'm sure that most of us can relate to at least one or two of those things, or know somebody that engages in one or two of those examples, Wendy. So thank you so much for I guess I'm wondering, what are some of the problems that this overthinking can cause for people?
Yeah, very good question. Very good question. So probably with overthinking, it can feel as though it is helping us because we tell ourselves a story that we're preparing or protecting ourselves. Okay. So that also becomes part of the vicious circle, really. Ruminate, or I need to worry in order to get things right. If I don't worry, then things are really going to go wrong. So this can create real problems. As I said before, it can affect our sleep because our minds, if people only use distraction techniques are fine up to a point. But the problem is when your mind is still and when you're trying to sleep, that's when, boom, everything comes back. So your mind becomes over busy because you haven't dealt with the issues in different ways. The other problem is that you constantly think of worst case scenarios. So what it says to the brain is that you are constantly in danger. So you're constantly in this sort of loop of anxiety, fight or flight kind of thing. So that's actually not very good or healthy for our well-being. Can also affect our mood because we keep on focusing on what went wrong or what might go wrong. So you can see where if always focusing on the bad and the wrong and the problems, it can really affect our mood, but it can also affect our self-confidence because here's an opportunity for our internal self-critic to actually get louder and louder and tell you off more and more and more. Again, that vicious cycle. So you're worrying about things in the future that you're going to get it wrong, or you think you got wrongs in the past that actually isn't good for your brain. And then bang, here you go. Your inner critic also says that you've got it even wronger, if that's a word, you've got it even wronger. And then you're more tired and exhausted. Okay.
So what overthinking is, and some of the problems that it can cause, but why do we do it? I mean, if it's this problematic for us, why are we doing it?
Yes, so I think it's really good to understand how the brain works. Neuroscience has come a long way. And I think what most people agree with is that, part of our threat system, the amygdala system, is designed to keep us safe. Okay. The basic survival mechanism. So it scans for danger. Part of our old brain, it's how we're made. We're mammals, we're animals. We look for danger to keep ourselves safe. Okay. Tries to protect us. It tries to predict what happens next. Okay, if you're in a forest and you see in Canada or somewhere like that, and you see a brown shape in the woods, our brain goes there and thinks, what is that brown shape? It could be an animal that's going to eat us. We can't take away from that brown shape. We have to understand it. So we have to understand it to know how to deal with it. The problem is a lot of the threats in our modern world are actually, they haven't happened yet. They're in our imagination. Because it's uncertain, it's out of our control, the brain gets stuck because we can't control what that brown thing is in the forest. We can't do anything about that. All we can do is either attack it or flee from it, get stuck in that loop. So overthinking is often the brain saying, I'm trying to protect you. So what we need to do is rather attack ourselves for overthinking. We need to have a more skillful response. So one example could be, thank you, mind. Thank you, mind. Your mind's your friend. Thank you. You're trying to help me, but it's not really useful right now. Perhaps we could have a different conversation. One way of doing it.
So just having that compassionate voice, and you often talk about that sort of very compassionate approach in therapy, don't you? So with that in mind, how do we learn? I mean, you gave one example then, but how do we learn to overcome that overthinking that can be so damaging to us, really?
And I think the first step is awareness. It's actually understanding what you are doing and the next step and the next step as well. So we often I've called that a vicious circle. Sometimes in cognitive behavior therapy, we call that a conceptualization. It's like a map where we're understanding our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviors, and our physical symptoms are all interrelated and they all affect each other. By actually just writing that down on a piece of paper, what is your thinking and feeling and the consequences can be very enlightening because you see it on a piece of paper, it sort of changes the dynamic. So understanding it and being aware of it is a really important thing. So the first major step, I'm going to call it, is called the overthinking loop. So notice what's happened. Instead of the judgment of saying, I'm being ridiculous, say, I'm just overthinking at the moment. And this creates a just tiny little bit distance. You're actually talking about your relationship with the thought. You can tell yourself, you are not the thought. You are the person noticing the thought. And you can see, I hope you see that there's a little bit of difference there as well. Okay, so step one is if you notice, sometimes you feel it rather than be aware of it in your head. You sort of feel that tension or that anxiety or maybe a bit of a low mood. You stop and say, hang on a minute. I think I'm overthinking here. And then ask yourself, am I really solving a problem here, or am I just going round and round, stuck in this loop of circles? Okay. If you notice the difference and you are going round in circles, and then there are some other techniques you can have. Okay. So the next step, solution number 2, is separate the facts from the fears. And I like that. What's a fact? You can write it down. What's a fact and what's a fear? Okay. And what happens sometimes is in your mind, it's sort of a bit of a mesh up, really. You don't know what's a thought, what's a feeling. It just all feels a bit sort of messed up. Okay. So you can take a piece of paper and write fact and fears. So a fact is something you know for certain. A fear is something your mind is predicting. So going back to that example earlier about somebody not texting us. Okay. A fact is my friend hasn't replied to my message. Okay, that's very clear. The fear might be they're upset with me. The story might be I've done something wrong and the friendship is the friendship's in trouble. Okay, so there you have. You've got the facts, you've got the fears, and then ask yourself is maybe this is a story that I'm telling myself. Maybe there's another possible explanation. Okay, so you can write down maybe the phone's broke, maybe they're away on holiday, maybe they're busy, maybe it's not a good time, maybe they've missed the text. Okay, so you can actually write down some possible explanations. And then my favorite bit, which is very CBT, is write down an action plan. Okay, so these are the steps I can do. So you can actually contact your friend. You can maybe use WhatsApp rather than text. You maybe FaceTime them. You maybe speak to a friend and say, oh, is another friend, is this person on holiday or something like that? It actually helps you to be proactive. And that's where the problem solving comes in rather than just this sort of loop. Okay. So the main key skill of CBT is the relationship we have with our thoughts. I know I've said that before, but it's so important. Okay. So rather than the skill we kind of teach people is most people, when they have their thoughts, they believe them because it's in their head. And what we're trying to get them to do is actually examine your thoughts. You're not trying to be perfect, happy, clappy, woo-woo kind of person. You don't have to force positive thinking. You're just trying to think more balanced. Okay. So some really good questions you can write down as well on a piece of paper is, that's the thought again. Maybe, I was rubbish at this meeting. Okay. Ask yourself, what's the evidence that supports this thought? What makes you think you're rubbish? What exactly did you do that made you think you're rubbish? What evidence does not support this thought? Is there any feedback that you got? Maybe somebody said, well done to you as well. Or maybe it was recorded and you can sort of see the recording back. Am I using all or nothing thinking? What that means is, am I just giving myself a label and say, everything I do is bad? It was a disaster. Okay. It's exaggerating it as well. It's a disaster and I'm going to mess up again. Okay. So another good question is, am I predicting the future? And in that situation, I've written, I'm going to mess up again. Can you hear? I am going to mess up again is a future prediction. So you become aware of that. Am I mind reading? Did I go into this meeting and think that so say somebody yawns, it's a great one. If somebody yawns, okay. Somebody with inner critic will say, well, they're bored. I've bored them. I've failed. I'm terrible. Whereas an alternative explanation is they're probably very tired. They've been sitting down for a long time. It's probably hot. Maybe they didn't sleep very well last night. There's other reasons why a person might be yawning, but a person with an inner self-critic, overthinker, will think, it's me, it's my fault. That's an example of mind reading. Another really good question that is a classic CBT question that loads and loads of CBT people use, but what would I say to a friend in this situation? Okay, so you take yourself out of your own perspective and think about how you talk to a friend. Now, I'm sure most friends would say, it's in your head. You don't even you've probably done absolutely nothing in this meeting that makes you think you've made such a huge mistake. There's zero evidence of you actually saying, nobody said anything terrible or anything like that. Okay. And then the final step is you create a more balanced thought. So rather than I've messed up, I've completely failed, you might say, I did feel awkward in that meeting, but there's no evidence that people noticed or made any comments. People did not comment on it. So you can see it's much more kind of rational, much more factual, but it does give a little bit, it's a little bit kind, isn't it? Saying, I didn't feel very well. I didn't feel I did very good, but that's okay. But actually, did it matter? Did anybody notice? So the next one is the worry decision tree. Okay. And I think this is a really, really one of my favorite tools to use in CBT. It's very practical. So you ask yourself the question, is this a real problem I can do something about? Okay, so it's either yes or no. So we can't do anything about wars in this country. It's very, very sad. It's terrible, but sadly, we can't go and solve that war. But what we can do is if we're worried about a child, for example, we can probably do something about that. Worried about a child not communicating with you would be a good example. Yeah, I can do something about that. So you actually do a bit of problem solving. Okay, what are my options? How can I solve this? And then again, you go back to that action plan. And the idea is to make it specific. So I will talk to my daughter after tea today and we'll sit down and I'll ask her how her day was and I'll ask her the question. Okay, it's good to actually make the action plan really quite small steps and make it very, very clear. The good one for overthinking in the future is creating a worry time. So what you do this time, and I think it takes a little bit of practice doing this one, and we'll be honest, is if you notice you're worrying all day long, you're constantly overthinking, and that's exhausting, isn't it? You're always going like that. You say to yourself, right, I'm going to give myself a time, ideally every day, where you're going to have a good worry. You're going to really enjoy the worry. So it's not a good idea to have it too late in the day, say before you go to bed, because you'll be full of worry. So maybe early evening is quite a good thing. And you can write them all down. You can use different techniques. You can say, is this a problem I can solve? And you can do a little problem solving, a bit of action plan there if you can. What sort of problem solving things you can do around worry. And you get it out and then you rip up the piece of paper, put it away, you get on with your life. So you're constantly trying to defer the worry to a particular time. If you can't solve it, you just sort of like practice letting it go. You can do a visualization. One of my favorites is imagining the worry going on a cloud and the cloud goes away and then the sun comes out. I like that one. Okay. So it takes a bit of practice as well, but it's certainly possible, just seeing the worry go away if you can't solve it. Another really good thing about overthinking, it's a very mind specific situation. It's all here. What can really help is actually focusing more on our body and our senses. And mindfulness is amazingly good at helping us to connect to the present moment and really being fully present and savoring the present moment. Okay, and there's quite a classic grounding exercise, which I think is always good to mention. And you can do variations of this. It's very, very simple. All you need to do is stay present, is look around and name 5 things you can see in the room, 4 things you can feel, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and ideally 1 thing you can taste. You might or not always be able to do, but that's fine. Okay. Another really good grounding exercise is just focus on your breathing, just slow, gentle breathing, and just feel your feet on the floor, almost sitting on the chair, your feet on the floor. Really feel that. I'm doing it right now. Feel that connection with the floor. Very, very good grounding exercise. And, by the time you've done that, the thought is probably gone because you're focusing more on the here and now and your senses. If it's gone, it can feel just a little bit lighter as well. Okay, we're on number 7. This is another favorite one of mine, and it comes from compassion focused therapy. And what happens is when we're overthinking, we are very self-critical as well. We're so good. We've got experts at being self-critical. Okay. So what happens is they overthink, and then they say, well, why am I like this? I've failed. I should be over this. I've just made everything worse. I'm never going to get any better. You can hear all those sort of negative, critical thoughts. Okay. And so you just learn to be kinder to yourself. Like, what would you say to a friend? Is a good example of a kinder thing. So you might just say a bit of empathy. This is difficult. Okay, this is difficult. But I have to remember what the science says is it's just part of my brain, which is just trying to protect myself. I just need to slow down. Let's go for a mindful walk, do a bit of relaxation exercises, and then just take one little step at a time. Okay? So just slowly being kinder to yourself. And a very good exercise is actually very, very simple. You just put your hand on your chest like this, or anywhere else which you feel is calming. You can put two hands in, you can put one hand there and one hand on your stomach, whatever sort of feels like a nice grounding exercise. And just speak to yourself as if you were caring about a friend, okay? Someone that you care about, someone you've got compassionate for. And when you do that, so the tone of voice is really important, okay? So I'm here, I'm right now, I'm having some distressing thoughts, but I'm okay. It's almost like giving yourself a little bit of a hug. It can be quite reassuring and nice. And it's really important to remember compassion is not some woo-woo, fluffy kind of thing. It's often about being brave and facing issues, but doing it in a way where you're learning to be your best friend and being kind to yourself. Practice this all the time. It's not about giving excuses. It's about having that deep understanding that we are all human. We're all fallible, that aren't quite working well and all that kind of stuff. It's okay. You're just turning up and doing your best under that situation as well. Okay. Great. Comes from a therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT for short. And sometimes one of the criticisms of CBT is sometimes when you're trying to challenge the thought, you actually end up arguing with the thoughts, and it sort of keeps the thought there. So this goes back to actually having a different relationship with the thought. If we keep on fighting the thought, it can actually make the thought bigger. Okay. You wouldn't say, I will fail. You say, I'm having the thought that I will fail. So you're noticing it's a thought rather than a fact. Okay. And the other really good thing about ACT is it makes you sort of really think about what's important to you. They use the word values. So a value could be how you want to be in yourself. So it could be, I want to be a kind person. I want to be a good person. I want to spend a lot of time with my family or my loved ones as well. So ask yourself, what matters to me right now? So if you value your health, okay, you could just go for a walk and you're living a life according to your personal values. If you want more connection, you might contact a friend and send a kind message as well. Sort of say, I really appreciate you for being such a good friend. Thank you. That is you living out your values. If you value courage, you might take a first step in doing something that you find really difficult. Say a presentation at work, you actually find enough courage to sort of stand up and do the presentation. Okay. So the thought's still there, but you don't kind of just notice it as a thought. It's the way that ACT says it. I think that's a really, really good way of doing it. Lots of research around ACT being very, very powerful and a very good therapy as well. Another therapy is called dialectical behavioural therapy, or DBT for short. One of its techniques is actually a skill called doing the opposite action. So in simple terms, it means doing the helpful thing that the fear is trying to stop you doing when the fear does not fit the facts or the fear is stronger than needed. So again, often if you believe you're going to do something badly, the problem is you will probably avoid it and then you'll never learn to do it. I don't know about you, Ian, but it's a common thing. Essays sort of thing, so I avoid it, and of course it got worse and worse and worse the longer I would avoid it. That's a classic example. Okay, so It's trying to actually do the opposite. So say you're sending an email, okay, and then you realize you're avoiding it because you don't know how to write it, or it's a difficult email to send, or, for some reason it's difficult. Okay. You would say, okay, what small action can I take? So you might do like a little bit of a draft. Nowadays, people might chat GPT their email and sort of get some ideas how to answer difficult error. You're taking action. Okay. If you cancel plans because you feel too anxious, the opposite action might be to say you're going to a party and you've got a bit of social anxiety, and it's a big thing going to a big party like that. So your natural reaction would be to avoid, not to go to the party at all. DBT would say, take the opposite action, try and go. Even if it is like, for 5 minutes, or having a plan to leave if you need to, you're still taking that action. You're still building that self-confidence that you can do this. Okay. And you're teaching your brain that you can cope with these situations. Okay. And then my last tip is creating a calm place for nighttime overthinking. As I said before, it's a very common thing, people overthinking at night times. Okay. Actually having a plan for a bedtime routine is really good. Okay. So one idea, which again I think works really, really well, is just keep a very ordinary, doesn't have to be expensive, no, doesn't have to be fancy. It's an ordinary exercise book by your bed. And then if you have any worries, you simply write them down. And also get back to that little action plan, put a step there as well. Okay, even if it is something you can't control, you can still say, okay, well, if the worry comes up, I can't do anything about it. Say you're worrying about the war, you can't change the war, but you can take an action step. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go a mindfulness walk and focus on the here and now and really enjoy that. So you're still taking a step, okay? And then you tell yourself, well, it's written down, so it's out of my mind. I don't have to worry about it now. I don't have to solve it right now, okay? And then you just focus on your breathing. And then you can just focus again on your surroundings. You can focus on the feeling of the weight of the duvet or the softness of the pillow, or just sort of focus on your body again, breathing gently and relaxing, just again, take away from your mind. Okay. And if the worry keeps coming up, you just tell your mind, thank you, mind. Yeah, I'll deal with it tomorrow. Thank you. Okay. It's just sort of trying to get some boundaries around with your thinking. So they're my 10 top tips to overthinking, Ian.
Thank you, Wendy.
Yes, certainly, Ian. Yeah. Just how does it work in practice?
Mm.
And as I said before, you don't have to do all these things. You can just take one or two techniques that you think, oh, I like the sound of that. I'm going to try that. So let's imagine somebody called Sarah, just a name I picked out of the blue. So Sarah will be fine. Okay. So she sends a message to a colleague. Classic, doesn't get a reply. Okay. So she goes into that overthinking loop. So her mind starts to feel a threat reaction. So her mind races, the fight or flight. So she goes to, my gosh, what have I done? Annoyed them. Is it rude? What happens if they tell everyone that I've sent this awful rude message? Constantly checking her phone to see whether the message comes. And then, of course, because she's in fight or flight, the threat is he hasn't replied. So she then struggles to get on with her work. So those sort of vicious cycle actually happens then. Okay. So the first thing she does to help herself is to name it. She's recognized she's in this overthinking loop. It's not problem solving, looking at her phone. It's not problem solving. It's just going over and over again, the same problem. So she makes a list. She separates the facts from the fears. So she writes that list. Okay. So the fact is that the colleague has not replied. The fear is that she's done something wrong. Okay. So she writes down and it's the writing which is important. What other explanations could it be? Okay. And as I said before, it could be that he's busy, he's got his phone switched off, he's missed the message to work, he can't read his phone at the moment, all kinds of things. And then the next step she could do is to do an action. Okay. So she makes a decision that she's not going to check her phone for 30 minutes. okay? Because the checking the phone is just making everything worse. And she's going to focus on her work. She might, to get more into the present moment, she might do a grounding exercise. That one, okay? She changes her relationship with the thought rather than I've offended him, and says, I'm having the thought that they're annoyed with me. And again, she could write that down, make it clearer. The thought is still there, but it's less strong, and she can create some distance from it. And I would actually probably add another action plan there, something about doing. I think I'm very keen on, doing something about the problem. So maybe if he doesn't reply in a day, I would probably either go and speak to him, make sure everything's okay, or send another text or something like that as well, because brain likes closure. The brain likes things sorted, so it's completed. So if she never really addresses the problem that he hasn't answered the text, that will bother her. So I think that's the last thing I would do. So just to recap, because there was a lot of information there. So number 1 is name the overthinking loop, separate the facts from the fears, challenging the negative thought that you have, use the worry decision tree, which is problem solving about the worry. Set aside a time to worry as well, and have a really good worry in that time, but then try to defer the worry at other times. Focus back on the mindfulness, which I think is so good, coming back to the body and our senses, maybe doing a mindful activity like going for a walk, a mindful walk where you're more in the moment as well. Learn to be kinder to yourself, okay? Compassion, not criticism. Always think about what's important in your life. In this situation with a work colleague, maybe it's important to her, maybe this relationship is really important to her. So maybe a value would be is to make sure that she deals with the issue, that she finds out why he hasn't replied. And if he is at all offended, to repair the relationship. That would be an example of acting on your values. Again, avoidance doesn't help. Okay, so do the opposite action. Be proactive, make a small step, try and do that. And have a very good bedtime routine for nighttime, especially writing things down so they're not going over in your head all the time. Having clarity is really a good thing. So if you take away one thing from today, let it be this: overthinking. It's not a sign that you're weak or you're broken or anything like that. It's just your busy mind. We have such busy minds trying to keep us safe. But you can train your mind. You can change your mind. You can learn to pause, question, soothe, accept, and choose your next step. I think a really good way of doing these things is to start small. Take one tool from today and practice it. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to begin. Thank you so much for listening. And there are my 10 top tips.
Thank you, Wendy. Absolutely fascinating once again. I'm sure many, many people will have found that incredibly helpful, incredibly useful. But there may be people that are thinking, actually, what I'd really like is to have some help in putting some of those things into practice. And if people are looking to get professional help and they want to get hold of you, Wendy, how would they go about doing it?
So the best way is to contact me via my website, wendycastellino.com, because that's where you can email me, and that's where I've got my contact details. And you'll also have a look at what I've got. I've got some free downloads there and some resources. I've got some meditation exercises people can join, can download, lots of blogs, obviously the podcast as well. So there's lots and lots of information on there as well. So even if you don't want to have therapy, you can certainly educate yourself around, good evidence-based practices. And what about you, Ian? How do people get in contact with you?
Thank you. So, as you say, Hope Therapy has a team of counsellors right around the country. We work with overthinking literally on a day-to-day basis. We have people who are working from a CBT perspective, but also other therapeutic approaches as well. If people would like to get in touch, for a completely free and without pressure consultation. They're very welcome just to go to our website, www.hopefulminds.co.uk. So that's www.hopefulminds.co.uk. You can book in for a free consultation. We also have lots of free resources on the website as well. So do have a look around, and there's something there that people might find really useful. Just for me to thank you once again, Wendy, for another absolutely fascinating podcast with you, information in there. So thank you so much for that. And thank you so much to all of our listeners and viewers for watching our podcast. We think, and if you could subscribe, it really helps us to just continue getting that message out there to people as well. So thank you once again.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you for everybody for listening.